So in the end, the Beatles didn't go out with a bombastic bang. They went out with a gentle, delicate, heartfelt murmur.
Words of wisdom, let it be.
There was no farewell tour, no final spectacle of a concert, goodbye concert or anything like that. There was just one last album, one last press release, and 4 young men walking away from one of the most beloved bands in the entire world, arguably still is to this day, without looking back. But don't let the silence fool you. Behind the curtain, emotions ran deep and potent. There was heartbreak, there was relief, and most importantly, above all, the crux of this whole operation, there was love. Complicated, enduring, and real immense love. This is the story of the Beatles' final moments as a band and how their silent departure would alter the trajectory of music forever. So let's start at the truth, which is there was no one single moment where the Beatles broke up, in the sense where there wasn't like one fallout, one moment you can point to, no big fight, no blowout, no slamming of the doors. It was more like a slow, meekish drift fading out. The thing is, by early 1970, they were barely functioning or moving as a unit, each recorded separately, sometimes on different days, and we'll go as far as to say sometimes in different cities, because, you just got to do what you got to do with the circumstances at hand sometimes, and you just got to get creative and get the thing done. George over here was absolutely blossoming into a marvelous powerhouse of a songwriter, really coming into his own there. Then we had John, who was knee-deep in conceptual art, ever the intellectual that he was, and really getting into political statements. Then Paul, just trying to hold everything together. This isn't new for him. And, doing it when he probably couldn't or shouldn't have. And then Ringo, always our beloved peacemaker, just watching the ship that he loved so much begin to not sink, but sail away, reroute. On April 10th, 1970, Paul McCartney gave an interview to promote his solo debut album.
I'm amazed the way you love me all the time. I'm a lonely man who's in the middle of something.
In it, he confirmed what had long been whispered. The Beatles were no more. There was no press conference, no official statement. It was just this softly worded Q&A that wound up sending shockwaves around the entire world. Fans were heartbroken, as you can imagine. The newspaper, they took that headline and ran with it as if a monarch had passed away. As for the rest of the band, John was fuming, but George and Ringo, they stayed quiet. This breakup, not unlike the actual band itself, was anything but simple, cut and dry. No. When you really look at it and concentrate on that final stretch, Abbey Road, Let It Be, it's hard to fathom that this was a band falling apart. The music was still transcendent, from golden slumbers
Sleep, pretty darling, do not cry.
to Across the Universe.
Nothing's gonna change my world.
These were men saying goodbye without actually saying goodbye. It's that feeling where you're not going to cry, but you have that lump in your throat. And it's almost worse because it's like all that emotion is trapped right here. These weren't the bitter notes of a crumbling band, but this beautiful harmonization, this coming together of a group that still knew how to create magic, how to make wonder.
Take a pony. I'm in mine, I'm in mine, I'm in mine. Now the frightened are leaving it, everyone's weaving it.
And facilitate something that is fantastically otherworldly. The Let It Be film, released just days after the album, initially poured salt on an open wound. Initially being the operative word here, initially. Audiences watched in stunned silence as their darling Beatles looked tired, distracted, disoriented, and distant. Yet we can't gloss over the fact that through the tension, there was something that ran deeper there. There was a familiarity, a history, a brotherhood, an undeniable connection. The brilliance and resilience of that astonishingly killer rooftop performance. There was certainly something to hold on to, something to believe in. Let's just say it, something to celebrate. In the months following the breakup, each Beatle handled the fallout in their own distinct, individual, and unique way. So we had Paul, who retreated to the Scottish countryside with Linda and the kids, and he was recording alone and quietly rebuilding. Then we have George, who was finally stepping out into the light. He now had this loaded treasure chest of songs no one had heard yet. John poured himself into activism, art, and raw confessionals. And Ringo, he did what Ringo does best. He showed up with heart and humor and ready for the next chapter. They didn't mourn. You see how that works? They evolved. They rose to the occasion. Here's the truth. Even after the breakup, the Beatles were never really entirely gone. They still popped up on each other's records. They still sent postcards. And when John was taken from the world too soon, the three remaining Beatles quietly reunited to honor him. So the band was broken. That happened. But the love, that never left. It was never even dimmed, never touched. In time, stories took over. Yoko broke them up. Paul was a controlling megalomaniac. George was a self-pitying pessimist who always felt sidelined. John went rogue. But all those stories are far too neat to be real. What actually happened? Well, they were four extraordinary men with magnificent talents that grew up under the spotlight and eventually grew out of it in different directions. Though they never really outgrew the spotlight, they were always in the spotlight, but it caused them to go separate ways. You know what I mean. The Beatles weren't a tragedy. They were a blessing to the world, a miracle that lasted longer than anyone really had the right to expect. The Beatles granted the world a soundtrack to grow up with, to fall in love with, to fall out of love with, to grieve with, and to just lose your mind and dance a little sometimes. Though this era has come to an end, the story is far from over. Because what comes next is the rest of the tale, the solo years, the reinventions, the rediscoveries, and a few extra special surprises thrown in there just as a treat. The Beatles walked off the stage, but each of them brought their own spotlight with them wherever they went. We're just getting started.